for me to consider you a good producer, you have to know how to engineer a session, like basic engineering.
Producers, beat makers, whatever you want to call us, we're constantly being given criteria for what constitutes real producers or real beat makers or whatever, real composers. Even the titles are a problem for us. But there must be some traits that all great producers or many great producers have in common. I want to talk about what those might be. I have some ideas. Aaron and Dame are managers, visionaries, etc. They don't make beats or produce music themselves, but they work with producers quite often. And so having a perspective that's outside of the kind of bias that we as producers carry ourselves is really valuable. I want to hear your ideas too. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think the traits of a great producer are, or what producers should know to elevate their careers and their talents in 2026. Do producers and beat makers need to know music theory? Do they need to be proficient in playing an instrument? Do they have to be able to score or read music or sight read, whatever? And I've always pointed out that music existed before formal music theory existed, right? So you don't need to know formal music theory to be a great musician. Logically, that just makes sense. And you can know music theory and not be a great musician. Lots of great musicians weren't formally trained. They couldn't explain their process in a way that was consistent with and within the framework of music theory, but they intuitively knew how to make music. And you see little kids doing that, like a kid that never had, I'm talking like an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old that never had any sort of musical training. You give them a drum set, they'll figure out rhythm in 4/4 time without you telling it to them. Same way if you hand them an iPad with a beat making app on it, they'll figure out how to use the grid and it will sound, a lot of the time, sometimes it'll be completely chaotic, but sometimes it will sound, on beat and sometimes even surprisingly good. Why? Because they have this internalized music theory that is in this abstract sense, not formal, numbered and something that they could explain and articulate clearly. So if you can play an instrument by ear, for example, or if you can make a beat with consistent rhythm and employ melody and harmony, and hey, music theory. You don't express it with staffs and notes and tablature, but you still know music theory. I think there are some foundational music concepts that producers should know just to be good producers, just to be functional in whatever projects they're working on. I'd love to hear yours too, because neither of you produce music directly. But number one, I'd say rhythm, but an advanced concept of rhythm, like just knowing stuff like BPM and knowing the difference between 3/4 and 4/4 should kind of be the minimum to me, because I've met a lot of people who could listen to a 4/4 track versus a 3/4 track, and it was infuriating to me because I'm not a music teacher. I didn't go to school for music, so I couldn't really sit down there and give them a lesson. But I'm like, you don't hear the difference in the rhythm? I'm going to do the counts. I'm like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. And they're like, oh no. I'm like, how do you not? Why do you make music right now? This is crazy. So I feel like if you don't know some of that stuff, maybe just brush up on it. Number two, I would say pitch. Definitely, because if you play a chord progression in D minor and you add a top line melody that's playing in E major scale, it's going to sound terrible. And also, I hear a lot of people doing that all the time. And I'm just like, hey, you don't need to know what an E minor or what an E major scale sounds like, or you don't need to tell me all the notes in the E major scale to know that shit does not go with the D minor chord progression that you played. You know what I mean? I have a few more, but what are some that you've noticed when working with producers?
I mean, you're educating me right now. I don't even know. I mean, I'm not a producer. I'm not expected to know some of this stuff. But so I'm more so just kind of being educated as you speak. I do think it's important to learn as much as you can, because I feel like as soon as you tell people you don't have to have, knowledge about something, like they'll take advantage of that. But I feel like in order to progress, and if you want to work on certain levels, and then I feel like you need to speak a certain language. So to have like at least a baseline knowledge of like what you're doing, what you're actually doing, as opposed to like, just kind of tripping upon like a dope beat. A lot of folks can't replicate it over and over and over again because they really don't know what they did the first time. So I don't see how you can't have like those basic building blocks and expect to have like a long career. Maybe it's possible, but I just don't think why you would try to prove that point instead of getting as good as you can at your craft. Like I don't,
Yeah.
instead of
It's
being
like
like,
trying to be the exception and not the rule. That doesn't make
right, like
sense.
why? You have time. Like
Yeah.
you have time to learn the stuff. And you're saying, at least a few things, like at least a week of studying can get you what it sounds like, you're asking for the bare minimum.
Well, it's a trap too. Knowledge is a trap because the second they learn that, then a whole new world opens up. So I've said, and I think people misunderstand me when I say, or maybe I'm just not expressing myself clearly when I say you don't need formal music theory to make great beats. And it's true. Like you can't really argue with that, but people will say, oh, so you're telling people not to learn. It can only help. I'm like, yeah, it can only help. Absolutely. There's anybody can become better based on learning more. I mean, you could find the most talented person who you perceive as the most talented person, ask them if there's anything left to learn, and they'll say, yeah, there's a lot left to learn. It's just a matter of, like Dame said, progression and growth, and that happens in many forms. I don't think it's necessarily just a person who makes beats and like, you know what, I want to get better at chord progressions. I need to take lessons. It could be that, but it could be just watching YouTube videos to learn the number system. I understand the number system. I don't have it committed to memory. Would that help me when working with session players? Absolutely. If I could just say, okay, yeah, that's the 4. Now play the 4. Now learning better chord theory. Would it help if I was like, if I knew all about the minor add 9s and diminished and this and that, and what are the other? There are a bunch of different more advanced chords that go beyond triads and 5ths and 9ths and stuff. That would absolutely be helpful for me to learn. So there's always something. But in terms of not even music theory, like, are there things that a producer that you would work with should have? Have you ever been in a session where you think, okay, I'm not getting through to this person in order for us to create the best product? I wish
I personally feel like good producers, and this is probably the hottest of hot takes, but to me, for me to consider you a good producer, you have to know how to engineer a session, like basic engineering. I'm not saying like massively, but to me, I've had so many, I run a writing camp and I've tried to put so many producers that I really like in this city in a position to work with some bigger artists and more opportunities. The writing camp is more for up and coming artists. We do like a varying mix of people. So some people are like full time. Some people have been nominated for Grammys, and some people are like, I'm a hobbyist who's taking this more serious. We try to put all those people in a room based off of skill set, not necessarily accolade. But because we bring so many other key producers and celebrity artists in, it's like a good position. And I can't tell you how many producers I can't bring into the camp setting because they don't know how to engineer. So this could be a hot take because people are like, you don't have to be like, in order to be a good manager, you don't have to know how to executively produce a project, right? But like, to me, I was a great manager because I did do some executive production. I don't know, same thing, chords, keys, all these different things, but I could be like, I think the BPM needs to be faster on this. I think we need this. I've executively produced a lot of individual tracks and projects that I think would not be up to par or would not do as well if I wouldn't have put my ear on it, right? But that's not an accolade of mine. I'm not going around saying I'm an executive producer. So I'm not saying you have to go around saying you're an engineer in order to be a producer. But I do think that if you're, in my book, a good producer, you have to be able to do basic engineering for a session. And that's one thing for me that I think most people may not agree with.
I might not agree, but I will say this. Becoming an engineer is going to be so helpful for you as a producer. I think most big producers, I've heard a lot of industry producers give that advice. Hey, if you want to get more placements, become an engineer, because if you're engineering, you're with the artist all the time. You understand their process intimately. And so you can become a better producer. You can start presenting beats to them. You're kind of the person who's now more valuable and more in control of their projects. And so having more control, having more influence means more placements because you have a better relationship with them. But beyond that, I think becoming an engineer just helps you be a better beat maker, to be a better producer. Because how are you going to learn vocal production if you don't track, or if you're at least not a part of the sessions? You're not. And how are you going to learn sequencing as a beat maker if you're not a part of the sessions? You're not. How are you going to learn drops and all this stuff? And how are you going to learn better mixing and use of space to build around? I mean, you might have it intuitively, but engineering is going to help. My last one, if
I
there's
think
another one.
sequencing is such a big thing, though.
Mm.
I feel like and then even like you said, like a beat could be an incredible beat, but when you have the right engineer who knows your sound, who says, oh, he's not going to like it when there's this much space there, or he's going to need more space here, or she's going to need this, and they're going to need that. They're going to want this at the beginning. Being able to modify that in real time in the studio or coming in with the track like that, like you said, almost guarantees you more placements because all you have to do is just learn your target audience. But like, I can tell you the producers that I know now that are making the most money or most consistently booked, and they're not even necessarily getting booked to do the studio session, but because they can engineer, it just opens up another. And then don't let it be a random night when somebody's feeling good and they're like, man, let's just record, and you have that skill set that you can pull out of the toolbox. Like, it just is a game changer.
Yeah, well, and people can package their deals too. Beats plus mixing. Make more money that way.
And Payne, I know you didn't want to take the conversation the direction this way, but when people start having that, are you a producer, beat maker? I would imagine that flows through to the percentage conversation. So it's super important, like, to know upfront, like, how you're being defined or valued, because that's going to flow through to ultimately your compensation or your percentage of the royalties, right?
And then even
Yeah.
outside of
Yeah.
percentage, being an engineer guarantees you a check. You know what I'm saying? Like,
More likely, at
you
least.
get, well, more likely, yeah, depending on the size of the artist. But it's like, if you're gonna engineer this session and you made the beat, boom, you get a check for that session, and then you can get the back end royalties, and then hopefully also a beat fee. But it's like, I don't know. That's why, to me, I'm not saying all producers have to engineer. I'm just saying, if we're defining a good producer, my thought
Mhm.
is you got to be able to engineer.
It makes them more involved, certainly. I'd say this is number 3, and this is the biggest can of worms, which is taste, because that's an X factor. You can't teach that. Someone could be musically and rhythmically perfect with their beats, and it still wouldn't be good. It's the reason why a lot of formally trained musicians who can play in a symphony, who can go on tour with a big band, aren't necessarily great composers. It's like why people with creative writing degrees aren't necessarily great rappers or songwriters or poets. They're good at the craft. They understand it. Maybe they could teach it, but they can't necessarily create amazing art themselves using the framework they learned. For producers, it's about stuff like sound selection, mixing. It's basically the application of theory in a way that can't be explained. And Quincy Jones has spoken about that, about how he can't explain where melodies come from. He assigns divinity to it. A lot of people assign divinity to music because it's kind of like figuring out the origin of beauty. Where does it come from? How? And taste is huge because there are people who violate, maybe not violate, well, yeah, I don't know. Music theory, I don't see it as a framework that can necessarily be violated, But there are people who go against the grain in terms of sound, in terms of style, etc., like a Pierre Bourne or somebody who comes out with something kind of weird that's unorthodox, but it sounds great. And people can't really explain why it sounds great. It just does. And that's taste. That's why certain producers have their own sound, and it's so distinct. Again, Pierre Bourne's a great example of that. There are a lot of other producers over the course of history, but the taste factor is really what makes someone invaluable in the music business, because anyone can remake a beat at this point with the tools, but not everyone can create a signature sound. Not everyone can create something different. Not everyone can create something that just has the X factor. And that's what's difficult. I mean, is what's difficult for me, because people, like A&Rs will say, we need a hit, we need something undeniable. I'm like, that's a matter of divinity, I guess, if you want to take it to religiosity. I don't necessarily want to, but where does that come from? You don't know. You can't explain it. That's why you're using these vague terms like undeniable. That doesn't mean anything. You're looking for something so special, but special doesn't just happen by chance. You know what I mean? What contributes to that? And I don't know. I don't have answers. So that's what I'm going to end on.